that we'll have the usual format for this evening as we have for these first Tuesdays for the last at least 25 years, maybe 35. Hard to keep track. Way back and into the mists of time, so we'll use that form. So please do join in with the chanting and bowing if you wish, but if you prefer just to sit and watch, that's quite all right as well. So we'll begin with the first part of the morning chanting in Pali and English, and that should be found on page 2. Oh, nope. Page 18, thank you. Page 18. Yo so bhagava araha samma sambuddho, to the Blessed One, the Lord, who fully attained perfect enlightenment, Savakato yena bhagavata Dhammo, to the teaching which he expounded so well, Supatipanno iyasa bhagavato sāvaka sangho, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, Tamayang bhagavantang sadhammang sasangang, to these the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, Imehi sakare hiyatarahang aropitehi abhipojayama. We render with offerings our rightful homage. Sadhu no bhande bhagava suchira pariniputopi. It is well for us that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, Pachima Janata Nuka Pamanasa, still and compassion for later generations, Ime sakare dukhatapana karabute pati kanhatu. May these simple offerings be accepted. Amahakandi karatang hitaya sukhaya, for our long-lasting benefit and for the happiness it gives us. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, Buddhang Bhagavan Tang Abhivademi. I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. Sawakato Bhagavata Dhammo. The teaching so completely explained by him, Dhammang Namasami. I bow to the Dhamma. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, Sanghang Namami. I bow to the Sangha. Annamayang Buddhassa Bhagavato Bhuvava Kanamakarangaro Se. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. We can also chant the suffusion with divine abidings. Hopefully that's in here. 30? You know this very well. We'll do the we'll do the Pali version. That's on page 30. Page 30. Annamayang chaturapamanya bhasanang karoma se. Metta sahangatena cetasa ekang disa paritava viharati tata dutiyang tata tatiyang tata chatutang itiyo Dhammado tiriyang savati sabha tataya sabhavan tang loka metta sahangatena cetasa vipule namahagatena apama nena averena hambaya pajena paritava viharati karuna sahangatena cetasa ekang disa paritava viharati tata dutiyang tata tatiyang tata chatutang itiyo dhammado tiriya sabati sabha tataya sabhavan lokang karuna sahangatena cetasa vipalena mahagate nahapamanena awe rena hamayapa jena parit viharati mudita sahangatena cetasa ekang disang paritava viharati tata dutiyang tata tatiyang tata chatutang itiyo dhamma yang sabati sabha tataya sabhavantang lokang mudita sahangatena cetasa vipalena mahagate na apamanena awe rena hamayapa jena paritava viharati upeka sahangatena cetasa ekang nisang paritava viharati tata dutiyang tata tatiyang tata chatutang itiyo dhammado tiriyang sabati sabha tataya sabhavantang lokang upeka sahangatena cetasa vipalena mahagate na apamanena awe rena hamayapa jena paritava viharati te. So has anyone not practiced meditation before this evening? Okay, so I'll give a little bit of instruction. First of all, before trying to do anything with the body or the mind, it's always helpful to take a moment to just appreciate how we're feeling. First of all, how is the body right now? Are we feeling warm or cool, heavy or light, comfortable or uncomfortable? How is it? There's no right or wrong way for the body to be feeling, but it's good for us to appreciate the starting point, the material that we're working with. So, how does the body feel? What's the mood of the mind? Are we excited, sleepy, depressed, busy, peaceful, confused? Again, there's no right or wrong way for the mind to be feeling, but it's helpful to begin with an appreciation, an open-heartedness to the way that the material of this body and mind are. As we bring attention to the field of experience in this present moment, the mental world, the physical world, we're making the basis of the meditation the quality of awareness itself. Being awake, being aware to the present reality. In this moment, it's 100% like this. As we bring attention to the body, then we notice the feelings of our posture. How is the body holding itself? Whether we're on a cushion or a stool or a chair. What's the posture like? So if we notice that we're tense and rigid, the spine is very, very straight, upright, but full of stress and tension, then there might be the thought, oh, I'm really tense, I'm uptight, I should relax. Or if at the other end of the scale, noticing the feelings of the spine and the posture, we notice, oh, I'm really slouching, I'm slumped over as usual, my posture's really listless. I should sit up straight. I need to get a better posture for the meditation, straighten up. In both of those extremes, notice how there's an I should, I must. I ought to be, I ought not to be. So there's a lot of I-making and mind-making in that. My posture, how I should be, how I am not yet, what I should be then, off in the future. So rather than basing the efforts of Dhamma practice on self-view, how I should be, how I want to be, instead of guiding the posture based on self-view, instead bringing awareness to bear upon our posture, feeling the nature of the spine, how the body is holding itself, feeling that, knowing that, then we can let the posture adjust itself on its own. It's a self-adjusting system, and awareness is the balancing agent. You don't have to do anything. If there's awareness, an open-hearted appreciation of the present, then the posture adjusts on its own. It's a self-adapting, self-adjusting system. Let the body move, change, adjust itself, and notice how it finds a natural, comfortable, upright posture, where the spine is held more straight, but without tension or rigidity, without stressing. as an easeful, energetic quality. And the more that the awareness, the attention can be sustained, alert and attuned to the present reality, the more peaceful, the more content and free the mind can be. But the attention is easily caught by strings of thought that arise in the mind, or sounds that we hear, feelings in the body. That can feed the habit of getting busy, the mind caught up in chattering, getting lost in its own thoughts. Or now that everything is quiet and peaceful, the room is warm, the whole thing can switch off. It's quiet, it's still, it's peaceful, time for a nap. So the mind easily drifts towards dullness and sleepiness, or towards busyness and activity. So, to help the attention stay with the present reality, then we can use a simple reference point, a way to help ground the attention in the way things are, in the reality of this present moment. There are many different kinds of objects that we can focus upon, but for most people, the most accessible, the most natural, is the ordinary rhythm of our own breathing. We've been breathing since we were born. It's nothing new to us. It's always been here, the rhythm of the breath. So we can let that simple, natural rhythm be the center of attention. And once again, rather than this being a thing that I am doing, me doing the breath, just let the body breathe on its own, as it has done for the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, however long it's been. To use the rhythm of the breathing as a meditation object doesn't have to be a sense of I and me and mine involved in that either, rather than me doing mindfulness of breathing. The body breathes on its own, and we can let that gentle presence be something that guides us quite comfortably, naturally. Just like the white lines on the lanes of the highway. A line to the left, a line to the right. You don't have to obsess about them. You don't have to be fixated on them. You see them, you know them. You recognize what's being in the middle between them. It's a natural, easy, ordinary, non-stressful kind of attention. So similarly, we can let the in-breath and the out-breath be like the white lines, to the left, to the right. Let that simple rhythm be the guidelines for our attention. And whenever the attention gets snagged by a bit too much to the left or to the right, a bit too sleepy or a bit too busy, notice that, feel that. And once again, rather than it being me lost in thought, so I have to let go, be aware of that entanglement in thinking. Feel that, know that. And the awareness of that helps there to be a letting go, naturally, comfortably. The letting go happens on its own. It's not something that the ego has to be involved in. Similarly with waking up. Notice that dull, sleepy state. Being aware of that, knowing that, then wakefulness is re-established on its own. You don't have to do the waking up as an act of the ego. This is called basing the practice of Dhamma on Dhamma itself, on reality, on nature itself, rather than basing practice upon self-view. As we get a feel for this self-adjusting process, notice the results of that. How peaceful, how clear, how much more simple the mind is, how much more awake. hour is the time people usually request the opportunity to determine the refuges and precepts. Is that correct? If that is, then please go ahead. So I will recite the Namo Tassa 3 times, and then after I've finished the 3rd time, then you're all invited to repeat that together. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Sanghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Sanghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Sanghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tisarana gamanang nititaṃ. Panatipata Vairapmani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
Adinadana Vairapmani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given.
Kamesu michachara Vairapmani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Musavada Vairapmani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from lying. Sura Meraya Majappamadatana Vairapmani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
Imani pancha sikkhapadani silena sugating yanti silena poga sampada silena nibbutting yanti tasama silang visodaye. Can we take the lights down a bit? Thank you. Thank you. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Well, I'm very happy indeed to be back here at the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery once again, and this is a very familiar venue, and many familiar faces here in the group this evening, as well as a number of new faces. At the tea time today, one of the questions that came up was very frequently asked, and I felt was very relevant, so I thought I might speak a little bit more about that for the larger group this evening. So this was about the principles of non-attachment, or the practice of of letting go, and the role of that in following the Buddha's path. So this is a kind of terminology we use a lot, say in terms of meditation, just watching the mind, being the observer, being the one who knows, or in terms of the broader scope of our attitudes and our way of life, the way we connect with other people, practicing non-attachment, non-entanglement. These kind of principles are very strong and are used very, very often in the Buddhist teachings and have great value and meaning. But as came up in the conversation at the tea time, sometimes we can take this too literally. And so sometimes following meditation guidance or following what seems to be guidance for living, we can feel like, well, I should be unattached, therefore I should just sit here and endure my body in agony. I shouldn't interfere. I should sit still and just be with just watch this feeling as my body is on fire. And certainly the principles that our teachers, Luang Por Cha, Luang Por Sumedho, encourage a quality of resilience and patience and learning how to be non-reactive in the presence of pain. But being non-reactive is not the same as being non-responsive. I would make a slightly pedantic distinction between those two. So to be reactive is like this, when feeling say a feeling of pain in meditation, that we want to get rid of it. We want to, we're waiting for it to be over, and then if we can't stand it any longer, then we'll change our posture. But that change of posture is based on aversion to the pain and fear of what's going to happen to our body. And so we might feel, oh well, the practice is to just watch, just observe, and so I shouldn't move at all. I should just be with this painful feeling. But our bodies do have limits. Just as a number of you have chosen to sit on chairs, probably because your joints, your knees and your hips and other parts of the body get pretty uncomfortable and achy if you're trying to sit on the floor. So chairs are provided. So the difference between reactivity and responsivity, I would say, is that when we are feeling physical pain, just as an example in meditation, then there is the encouragement to be patient, to investigate that feeling as much as possible, but rather than just being guided by an idea of I should just watch, I shouldn't move, we can also just watch our intuitive sense of the body's limitations, if that makes sense. We can just watch the fact that the mind is saying, that's enough, the body has reached its limit, and if you stay with this posture, if you stay with that strain on that particular joint, damage will ensue. And I'm sure Ajahn Yaniko and others who've been involved in meditation retreats, living in meditation communities and practicing on retreats for long periods of time, you will be very familiar with this. Many of us and our friends have wrecked their knees, their backs, through that kind of overzealous effort at non-attachment or just enduring. So I'm not encouraging a kind of impatience or a lack of resolution, but what I am encouraging is learning to recognize that voice that says, this is enough, time to change the posture, that can be a very wise voice. And just observing, we can just observe that intuitive voice that says, that's enough, and we can just observe as the body changes its own posture. As I was describing in the meditation, it's a self-adjusting system, and the ego doesn't have to be involved. So I greatly encourage this in the meditation, to be learning to listen to that intuitive sense that we have, and then when there's that recognition of, okay, that's enough, and there's a Pali word for that's enoughness, which is matanyuta, knowing the right amount. So just as with eating food, you might have some delicious food in front of you, and you've taken quite a pile on your plate, and then there can come a certain moment when you realize that's enough. Then there's the challenge of like, well, do I put the spoon down, or do I feel like I should clean my plate? You know? But if we pay attention, as us in our monastic training, we know that the Buddha referred to this. There's a moment that comes when you know that's enough, and then the training is to put down the utensil, or to then stop eating and take some water to finish off. But that knowing of the right amount, that's not just with eating food or even just with sitting in meditation. That then translates into many areas of our life, and it's an extremely useful quality to develop. So in terms of the question that was asked about compassionate action, and so witnessing conflict and bad behavior, unskillful, cruel behavior, bullying and spitefulness, cruelty in the workplace, the question was, for those who weren't there at the tea time, the question was, well, I feel I can't just watch, I can't just observe, but rather I feel something needs to be said. So I'll take a moment and say that kind of action. Those words are really cruel. They're unkind. They're unhelpful. You know, please don't talk to other people in the workplace like that. And so the question was that unskillful? Am I kind of, am I not just watching? Am I out of tune with the practice of Buddha Dhamma, or is that something, you know, wise and skillful? And so I was saying, well, no, it sounds like that's exactly the appropriate response, because we mistake non-attachment, non-entanglement with passivity. We kind of overthink that. We take the idea of non-attachment, of non-entanglement, and we then have the idea of it. And, oh, therefore I should say nothing. Therefore the practice of the Buddha is to be still, be silent, don't interfere, don't intrude, don't disturb. But I would say that's a radical misunderstanding of the teaching. If we just look at the Buddha's life, he was not passive. He took a lot of action, a lot of initiative. He was a very creative thinker, a social reformer. He took a lot of risks. He confronted the status quo with regards to the caste system and you know, many other areas of spiritual life. The whole teaching on anatta, not self, was a major reversal of the usual languaging of spiritual practice in his time. The speaking about nibbana as coolness, making coolness the goal rather than tapas, you know, spiritual heat or spiritual accomplishment. So he was quite radical in his teaching, quite courageous and quite innovative. So he took a lot of action, made a lot of choices. He was not passive at all. So I feel we can take, even though it might be a bit presumptuous, I think we can take the Lord Buddha's life as an example. So yeah, he spoke up. He involved himself where something was useful to be said. Then he said it. If there was nothing to be done with the situation, if he'd already said something and people completely ignored him, usually he said it 3 times over. And if people were determined to ignore him, he said, "Okay." We didn't say "okay," but you know, the Pali equivalent of you know, "okay" or "so be it" or "ewang," thus it is, and he would just leave people to it. So he didn't force situations. He didn't impose his perspective. He offered it, often 3 times over, and if his perspective was rejected and people didn't take his advice, he said, "Okay, it's up to you, your business." So he didn't try and interfere with people's lives, but he offered a direction where he could. So I feel this kind of example in terms of compassionate action is very, very helpful. When we shouldn't assume that being the one who knows or being unattached means not taking action, because we can be not attached to our hesitancy or our fear that we're going to make waves or make things difficult, or people are not going to like us. So that the result, I would say, the result of non-attachment can be that you take more action, and you are more courageous. You're less governed by anxiety and say self-protection, but rather well, something needs to be said. Okay, no one else is saying it. Okay. So you're not attached to your wish for being left out of it or being or not being involved. So that I feel is helpful to take these words to heart and to see if that can reshape the way we see things. I often, in this instance, I like to quote the famous soliloquy from Hamlet, where Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this Shakespeare's play Hamlet. And so the situation for Hamlet is that he knows, or he's very, very strongly suspects, that his uncle has killed his father, the king, and then has married his mother, the queen. And he's pretty sure this has happened. The ghost of his father has come and told him, this is what happened. This is how I died. It wasn't an accident. My brother did it. Sorry, I'm not meaning to point at you. Just pointing to my left. It wasn't Anagarika Kiran. It was, so the king's brother did him in and took over the throne. So Hamlet is very sure this is what's happened, but he's trying to decide how should he act. So the speech begins to be or not to be, but it could also begin to act or not to act. So what's the right thing to do? And so it's like to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, i.e. to be passive, just let it all happen and do nothing, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, to step up and attack, to contend against his uncle and the way things are. And so I've got a feeling, my suspicion is that Shakespeare deliberately spelled it out in those two poles, because what he was trying to hint at was that there's a middle. And so rather than contending against the way things are, like starting a campaign in your workplace about trying to set everybody straight, so that having a kind of a civil behavior and politeness program that you're going to, with great good-heartedness and sincerity, launch and to get everyone to follow. I'm just using that as a randomly invented example. To take arms against a sea of troubles, to contend against the way things are, or the other extreme, to be passive and just to shut up, be quiet, not make any waves, to be passive with respect to the way things are. But I feel that the middle, and I would say the Buddha's way, is not to act or not to act, but rather, or not to be passive or to contend against the way things are, but to work with the way things are, based on mindfulness and wisdom. That's, I would say, is the middle way of the Buddha's path. So in our lives, we can say, okay, that's it, that's great, I heard Ajahn Amaro talk about this, that's it for me. From now on, middle way, that's it. If only it was so easy, just read the instructions, okay. Point A, point B, point C, okay, got that, off you go. We can't change our minds, our habits, our attitudes just by deciding about it. The decision or the idea can point a direction, that give us a clue, but then changing our hearts and changing the way that we relate to our living situations, our relationships with the family, our politics, the way we relate to our body and the living world. There's many dimensions of our lives. You can't just be different by an act of choice or act of will. But we can set a direction. And so in this respect, I like to often quote the principles that Barry Kapke, who was a Bay Area, one of the original members of the group that came along as our students, of Luang Por Amaro, myself, and was, I think, had one of the very, very first Buddhist websites, Dhamma.net, back in the early 90s. Early 90s, 30 years ago. So, but he passed away a few years back. I was with him when he died. But he had a massage school, Insight Bodhi Work, B-O-D-H-I. Very Bay Area nomenclature. Insight Bodhi Work. But he was very much loved and respected by his students. And he had three principles that he tried to convey to his students, and I feel it matches this very, very closely, the Bodhi work of the Buddha's path. And so in terms of giving guidelines or embodying this quality of being ready to work with the way things are, from a egotistical or non-contentious, but an active way. So the first principle is don't push, just use the weight of your own body. So this is basically in the languaging of his sort of body therapy and such like, but don't push, just use the weight of your own body. And that can be in social situations as well as physical treatment for other people and your own internal spiritual life. Don't push, just lean into it. Use the weight of your own body. Second principle was don't diagnose, just be aware. And I remember when this was being, someone was describing these principles to me, I thought, these are very, very, very valid and very helpful as a kind of compulsive diagnoser and explainer by habit myself, that ever since the age of about 3, I was ready to explain life, the universe, and everything to everybody. I was determined to be an authority on all things. I used to read encyclopedias so I would know everything, and I'd be able to answer every question and be in the know about every fact in the universe. So my sisters, we were gathering together with my sisters for my younger sister's 70th birthday, and they were recollecting that I'd sit down by this cabinet of the Encyclopedia Britannica and just at the age of 7 or 8 with the encyclopedia on my lap, just taking it all in. I certainly didn't memorize everything in the Britannica, but I had that urge to be able to understand everything, diagnose everything, explain everything. And so that's that second of Kondanya's principles, don't diagnose, just be aware. It's like, oh yes, that urge to diagnose, even if you have got a lot of information, the readiness to step back and say, well, that's all the data on this particular issue. That's everything that's going on in the family with regards to this particular issue. But it's not just the information. It's a bigger picture. So that don't diagnose, just be aware. You know the information already. You don't have to be spilling it out and taking refuge in the information. You can have a broader perspective. And then the third one is don't try to help, but don't turn away. The key word being trying. Doesn't mean we don't care. Doesn't mean we're not going to do anything. But it's the I've got to fix you so that I will feel better thing. We can easily be drawn into that. Can I speak from personal experiences that sometimes our urge to help others is so that we will feel more comfortable ourselves, and the others that we are helping are often, we can actually lose contact with those people or those beings that we are trying to help, because it's so much more about me feeling all right about myself and my world and who I am and what I do. And so that don't try to help, just be aware. And this was I'd heard about these from Barry, from Kondanya himself once or twice, but it was really spelled out when we had his funeral at Abhayagiri a number of years ago. One of his students wrote she couldn't come to the funeral, but she wrote from Taiwan where she was working, and she was saying how enormously helpful these principles had been for her. And that she said that when her younger sister was expecting a baby, this woman who was writing said, so I went to all these classes, these kind of natal assistance classes, and so I could be right there for my sister and help her when the baby was coming. And she said when she was actually giving birth, she was just screaming in pain, and so we were all trying to help. She didn't want anyone to be anywhere near her. She said, get out. So just the only thing she could focus on was the agony of the birth process. And so then she remembered this pieces of advice from Kondanya, like don't try to help, don't turn away. So she went and she came into the room, sat down at the end of the bed by her sister's feet, and just sat there while her sister was going through the whole birth process, because she didn't want anyone near her, didn't want anyone touching her. And so when the baby was born, and they were talking again after the whole sort of intense experience of the birthing, her sister said, "That was so great. You didn't try to make me feel all right. I just wanted to yell. I just had to scream. But it was so great. You were just there at the end of my bed. I could see your head. You weren't trying to fix me or make anything all right, but you were there. It was great. Thank you." And then she said, "So now when I see my sister holding her child, and the child is crying and upset and can't be consoled, but her sister is again not trying to fix the child and make her boy all right, but just holding him and being there." She said, "I see this thread of Kondanya's teaching, his wisdom, trickling down from one generation to the next." So I found that very, very, not just very moving, but really, really good advice, really good example. And I feel those principles: don't push, just use the weight of your own body. Don't diagnose, just be aware. Don't try to help, but don't turn away. I don't think he's copyrighted those, but I'm very happy to pass on the meme of those principles as a way of helping us to take action, compassionate action in the world in a skillful way. Maybe another of the things to share, I've also been reflecting on a lot recently, is why we are uncompassionate. Why do we conflict with others? Why do we find fault? And how is it not just how they are uncompassionate, that lot, those people in our workplace, in our family, or in the monastery? It can happen even in monasteries. Why are we not compassionate? Why are we judgmental, hard-hearted, and dismissive? Where does that come from? And as usual, I would say the source is the habits of clinging, grasping, and clinging to our self-righteousness, but I'm right and you're wrong, but I am right and you are wrong. So if you were different, everything would be good, right? I would be, and then I would be happy. You just have to change, and then I'll feel great. I'm sort of over egging the pudding, as we would say, if that's still a politically correct usage, but overstating it a little bit, but not very much. So attaching to our self-righteousness, our familiar way of doing things, our what we call the conventions that we feel how things should be done, whether it's how a meeting should be held, how meditation should be taught, how food should be prepared, how a building should be constructed, how decisions should be made, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How to park your car, how to drive, how to chant, how to bow. So we get attached to, it's called Silapata Paramasa, the attachment to conventions and forms, and also attachment to our views and opinions, that sense of, this is not an opinion, it's a fact, Ajahn. It's kind of interesting, I'm a wordy guy, as you can tell, probably. So one of the interesting things about the word fact, we take that as meaning an absolute reality, but the word fact comes from the Latin facere, which means something which is constructed, like a factory is where things are made. So a fact is a constructed thing. Interesting. And actually, which we often use to say, this is the truth, actually means just that has something that has been acted upon. It doesn't mean an absolute reality. So when we say actually, that just means you have acted upon it, or it has been acted upon. So that these words we take to point to absolute realities. They're actually, no pun intended, they're referring to conditional qualities. So that I feel is helpful for us to get a perspective on our opinions, our sense of, but this is true, this is right, this is a fact. And that if you study the scientific world at all, probably quite a few scientists in the room, you'll know that established truth and knowledge in kind of any field, from biology, physics, chemistry, cosmology, astrophysics, anywhere and everywhere, the reality of things, the version of reality keeps changing day by day, year by year. That a new paper gets published, and then, oh my goodness, what we thought was the truth is not the truth at all. Look at that! Wow, who would have thought? We thought we had the final word. So, attachment to opinions, attachment to our customary way of doing things, attachment to our own self-righteousness, and so on. These kinds of clinging are very prominent. And I would say these are the reasons why we are uncompassionate with each other. We're judgmental, that people don't fit in with our preferred versions of reality. So there's a particular teaching that it's not very well known, or people don't quote it very often, but I feel it's extremely significant. It's in the middle-length discourses, and it's called the Exposition of Non-Conflict, the Arana Vibhanga Sutta. If anybody is familiar with that, great, marvelous. But it's about language and about points of view. And in this teaching, the Buddha says, if we want to experience harmony and not to be conflicting with each others, then it's important that we don't attach to our personal experience and our personal languaging of things. Don't dwell on local usage or local vernacular. And so and probably at the time when he gave the teaching, he probably held up something very like this and said, so in some regions this is called, some regions this is called a pot, some places it's called a bowl, some places it's called a saucer, some places it's called a cup, some places it's called a dish. Yeah. And he goes through this list of about 8 or 9 or 10 different words, says, all referring to this same object in different places. They use different words to refer to this. So if you're attached to local usage, you say, no, it's not a pot or a dish or a saucer, it's a bell. It's a bell. Everyone knows it's a bell. No, it's a dish, it's a saucer, it's a pot. So if you dwell on your own particular usage, then you assume everybody else is wrong, and then you get conflict. There's and then when we recognize, oh, I call it a dish or I call it a saucer, and it works very well as a bell. It's got a beautiful sound, but you could use it as put your breakfast in. Yeah. You could put your teacup in there. But it's not intrinsically a saucer, a dish, a pot, a bowl, and such like. It is what it is, and we ascribe a different name or a different way of referring to it. So that if we are recognizing, oh, my point of view is just my chosen languaging. It's just when my mind sees this, it goes, oh, bell, probably from the Tibetan tradition. But it's not necessarily the case. If no one's ever seen a bell like this, they say, oh, that's nice, I can use that for my breakfast. Or put the rose petals in it. So it's that quality of recognizing the world that we experience is not the world. Just because we say dish, pot, saucer, bowl, and so on, it's our mind's version of the world is what we all experience. Just like here at Berkeley Buddhist Monastery this evening, 9 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. This is the version of the world that each of us are experiencing. It's not the world, it's just our mind's version of the world. Some of you have been coming along to my talks and these events for 20, 30 years. I first came to the Bay Area in 1990. So that was 34 years ago. So, and some of you have just come along for the first time this evening. So some of you, this is all very familiar. Some of you, it's not very familiar. So each of us has a different world of like someone, it's Ajahn Amaro, it's his voice again, this is just like the old days, yes, this is great. Or someone else who's just come along for the first time, this is all kind of weird. I don't understand half the words, and what's a refuge anyway? Everyone's joining in with that. I didn't get that bit. It's all kind of strange and new and like, whoa, this is kind of nice, but I don't know what it means. So which world are you? Which world are you in? And so that recognition of none of us experience the world. No matter how accurate you assume your perceptions and your understanding is, even if you have read the whole Britannica and you memorized it, none of us experience the world. Every single one of us experiences our mind's version of the world. And that's the same for every being on the planet, I would say. That's the case. So if we can appreciate that, going back to compassion, if we can appreciate that the world that I experience is my mind's version of the world, how could that possibly be exactly the same as everybody else's, or anybody else's? So if we really take that to heart, then we make a lot more space for other people to see things differently. So when we taste something and go, oh, it's delicious, and someone else goes, do you actually eat that stuff on purpose? It's like, really? Do you choose to eat Marmite? Those who are familiar with Marmite know it's you love it or you hate it. So, you really like that? So, I can say, yeah, it's good, but that's because I'm conditioned to it. If you're not conditioned to it, you go, ugh, this is really weird, disgusting, perhaps. So, if we want to cultivate this quality of compassion on the street, in the workplace, in the family, in the monastery, wherever in the world, then that recognition that we each occupy a somewhat different world, and we each experience a different world, then we make space for each other to have local variation. Other people, how could they see the world in the same way that we do? And so then we find we're much more gracious, much more peaceful, much more accommodating. We make much more space for each other, much more easily and naturally. So it being 9 o'clock, I'll finish there for the evening and open things up for some questions. If there are any questions in the room. Yes, front center, yes.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. I don't know that I have a question, but I'll just start with my gratitude for you being one of my original teachers that made such an impression on me and drew me into the Dharma, and for accompanying the Buddhist bicycle pilgrimage. And you said one word to me one time on the pilgrimage that I don't know if your intention or the way I received it, but you just said fear, and for me, fear was definitely the portal into the Dharma. They say like the hindrances actually become the portals to access the Dharma, and so for me, fear really stood in my way as I tried to do life before I got to Buddhism. And so that's just one of my early memories. And another one was your graciousness and your generosity. I used to go up after these Dharma talks and you would allow me to hold your hand so I could have like direct transmission of the Dharma, because you've actualized in your lifetime so much of the Buddha's teachings, and you took obviously what your teachers gave to you, and you, I feel like you directly transmit it and passed it on to me. And I'm the beneficiary of you being such a great teacher, and I just really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you.
To top that. Thank you. Yes, Alma, yeah. Very good. Yes, this is quite a common question in many different countries. One of the things about communication is you need a receiver as well as a transmitter. Otherwise, it's not a communication; it's a proclamation. So, in terms of communal understanding, and kind of in the theme of what I was saying this evening, a readiness to listen to other people rather than to leap to judgment, so leap to conclusions. That as soon as someone starts talking a certain way or you start using certain language, then we can easily kind of stop hearing. That we put them into a pigeonhole and say, oh, that person is like this, or they belong to that group, or they think like this, therefore X, Y, Z. And we've stopped hearing what they're saying, and we're seeing our own judgment of them. So and that's in a way the sort of epitome of non-communication is where you get two people talking at each other or past each other. And it looks like a conversation on the outside, but it's just two monologues, you know. And one person will be sort of waiting for the other one to pause so they can carry on with their monologue. But it's not really a discussion or a dialogue at all. So, learning to listen and to really hear what people are saying and to get a sense of where they're coming from. So I didn't speak Thai hardly at all when I was with Venerable Ajahn Chah in Thailand. But there was often another Western monk who there was a few that were very fluent and they could translate as Luang Por Chah was speaking. So I had a bit of a sense. And what was really interesting was that in conversation, people would come and visit him and ask questions every day. For hours and hours every day he would receive people and answer questions. And almost never did he answer a question in the terms in which it was asked. He would go to the place where the question came from. He would kind of answer the person rather than the question, if you see what I mean. So he would get a feeling for where people were at and where the words were coming from. In their body language, or the tone of their voice, or how they were dressed, or how they were sitting, or all kinds of however he attuned himself to the person, and then again I couldn't understand the details of the Thai, but he would almost always seem to sort of bypass the words of the question and go to where the question came from, and then help people to answer their own questions. So it was I would say it was a really good example of listening. Not just to the words that people were saying, but where they're coming from. If they're excited, if they're upset, if they're really frightened, if they are, feeling obligated to follow a particular ideology or a particular way of working, that they're supposed to do that because that's how they've been trained, and they've got to do it that way. Whatever it might be. And so getting a feeling, not just for the listening to the words, but where people are coming from. And then when there is a sense of respectfulness and the ability to attune to that, where people are coming from, as well as taking in the words, then we find that we can relate in a much more effective way. It's not easy. It takes a lot of mindfulness because of our own. We might have our own agendas that we want to express. Or if someone's speaking in a very, very harsh way, or very energetic, or very frightened, we get I'll speak for myself, very easily swept up in the emotion that the person's displaying. But again, that watching Ajahn Chah, someone might be really kind of totally excited and inspired, and like brimming with enthusiasm, and he would be just completely cool. Like he wouldn't put them down. But he wouldn't be drawn into something, or someone's really upset, they're all tearful. Again, he wouldn't be cold or distanced, but he wouldn't be intimidated or sort of overwhelmed by the feeling someone's having. Some of their partners just died, or they lost a child, and they're really upset. And you could, just by his body language and his tone of voice, you could tell he's really listening to them, he's receiving them, but he's not getting upset with them, or excited with them, or angry with them. sometimes people are, Luang Por, you can't do this. This is outrageous. I saw your monks are doing such and such. Shouldn't be this way. And again, it'd be not sort of blanked out, but just, you're really upset about this, aren't you? In a kind of friendly, kind way, and then through that, both receiving the person's mood and their tone, their attitude, as well as their words, then just letting his response come from that. He'd never had anything planned. He wouldn't have stock responses. So the degree to which that kind of thing can be woven in within the different Buddhist groups or within the workplace and the family, then we can have a more real communications rather than just tolerating each other. Such like. Yes.
I might be speaking for many people in this room that you know that the political events over the last couple of days have been very difficult, taking the conclusion that there's going to be an immense amount of suffering in the world. And many of us are feeling anger, and some feel despair, and some feel sadness, and so I'd like some words from you on how to relate to all this difficult stuff that's coming up, triggered by our external things.
Well, I haven't been keeping an incredibly close eye on the news, but a certain amount. We have a general election in the UK in 2 days' time, 4th of July. So that's occupying the attention of a lot of British people, and the American election process, as we all know, goes on for months and months and months and months. So I feel that the just bringing the emotions into your practice rather than looking at the emotions as getting in the way of your practice is a first step. Just having that as an idea, so that rather than thinking, I wish I wasn't feeling anxious or angry, so then I could practice, but rather, well, here is the feeling of resentment, or here is the feeling of fear, here is the feeling of righteous indignation. And the trick, or the skill, is to explore the emotion as a felt sense, rather than getting drawn into the stories about what should be done here, what shouldn't be done there. This is the mind easily gets drawn into those kind of narratives and explanations, and so to use the practice for these kind of things to consciously, if an emotion has arisen on its own, you feel that's sort of dominating your mind through the day, then rather than sitting down in the evening thinking, okay, I want to get away from that, I want to feel loving kindness and compassion instead, so you shut up and go away, and I'm kind of again exaggerating it a bit, so I can cultivate metta and karuna instead. But more helpful if something's really dominating the mind, like fear, as our friend was saying, or righteous indignation. Say, okay, let's look at this. And so one of the practices that Luang Por Sumedho would encourage, I found very, very helpful, is like a conscious exploration of emotion. And I think I was talking about this when I just was in Malaysia and Singapore, and was talking about this area of practice. And I got a vague memory that what happened was that Luang Por Sumedho was at some kind of an event or giving a teaching, and somebody asked him a question with words like, as a practicing Buddhist, we shouldn't feel emotions. I understand that. And so, and then sort of went on with their question from that. And Ajahn Sumedho was so kind of like mind-boggled by the idea of Buddhists, we shouldn't feel emotions? Like, you have really got the wrong end of the stick. And so that but quite, as this person speaking from the place of totally assuming that's what you're trying to do as a Buddhist, is trying to not feel anything. And so that hit Ajahn Sumedho as such a completely wrong idea. Like, this is not what we're aiming to do, to shut down, or to that sense of non-attachment. Is not about not feeling anything, but rather to understand the realm of emotion, of love and hate, and fear and desire, to know those feelings, but yet to be able to recognize the ones that are wholesome and beneficial, to give those energy and to follow those, and the ones that are destructive and harmful, divisive, to know those and to let them go, to train the mind to not feel them, or not to feel they've got to compulsively act on negative emotions, but rather to let them go. So that in the late 80s, early 90s, for several years, he was teaching a lot about mindfulness of emotion. And it might have just been one comment somebody made. I got the feeling that, because he began to talk about that a lot in the late 80s, and I think that one wrong question had a lot of really good results. Because it was very, very helpful, that rather than the idea that you shouldn't feel love or hate or fear or desire, but these are the results of having been born, having a mind, having a body, that those emotions are going to be there. So what he would describe is that to sit down, if there's a particular emotion that you want to investigate, sit down, bring your mind to as much quietness as you can, first of all, and then deliberately invite in something that you just heard on the television broadcast, or you read on a newspaper or a website or whatever, or just a person's name. You don't need a whole. You know the story already. It's like you don't need the narrative. You know the information. It's like you don't diagnose, just be aware. You know the story already. So just to plant the seed of that person that you're very inspired by, or very worried about, or very irritated by, or you feel indignant about, so just dropping the name or the event in in a very brief way, and then the trick or the skill is then taking the attention away from the verbiage or the stories around that, and turning it around and bringing it into the body. Okay, where do I feel that indignation? Where does fear manifest as a felt sense? So you're investigating the experience of fearing, of resenting, of raging, and so it's very difficult to do at first, but because the mind easily gets drawn into the stories and all the shoulds and shouldn'ts. But if you can just drop that in and then turn the attention, okay, how does this feel? Where is this felt? Is it my body just sort of stiff all over? Is there everything going hot? Is my belly tight? Is it can I breathe easily, or do it feel like I'm choking? What's the sensation? And again, Luang Por Amaro would say, everyone feels emotions differently. They take shape in different ways. So it's going to vary from one person to another. You can't say that anxiety will be like a knot in your solar plexus for everyone. For some people it might be. For someone else it's a steel bar across your shoulders. Or it can be just a sense of heat everywhere. Or just your hands are suddenly boiling hot. Things take shape in different ways for different people. So whatever that feeling is, there's almost invariably some physical sensation that goes with every emotional state. So to go to the physical sensation of it, and then to establish an awareness of that, and to create an open-hearted attitude towards the sensation. Not talking about the people or the things or what's been done or said, just this is the feeling of fear. It feels like this. It sits in the body here and it's like this. This is the feeling of rage. It's like this. And so you're not suppressing the events or saying, I'm not interested or not involved. I'm not going to take any action. Not at all. What you're doing is you're getting to know, okay, there's a mind, there's a body, here's this life. Fear is something can be felt. Rage is something can be felt. Love and excitement is something that can be felt. Compassion, grief is something that can be felt. Here it is. It feels this way. And I found that so helpful. I had never realized you could relate to emotionality in that way. And that it's a way of understanding the emotional processes of this body, this mind. And then the way he would guide it would be to say, okay, you take it's a few seconds to launch it, thinking of a particular person's name or a particular event, the election. And then, so you just need a moment to trigger it, and then to turn the attention to the physical sensations, and then to consciously sustain that, so let that sort of brew and be present for 5-10 minutes, just to really know that feeling as well as possible within the body. And then, so the last part is then using the breath, and particularly the out breath, as a way of relaxing with that feeling, and so bringing attention to the body in a very definite way, but using the out breath with its natural relinquishing, releasing qualities. And then, so sometimes it would take 5 seconds to launch an emotion, and then 40 minutes for it to fade. But and he would always recommend, and I found this too, I would recommend the same thing, just stay with it until the emotion and the sensations have naturally faded. And then you, after a time, it can be half an hour or an hour, it can be a long time, but to stay with it until it's gone back to zero, then in that, there's been a whole cycle from the mind in a state of focus and peace, then launching the whole thing, watching the whole emotional state sort of flourish and expand, and then watching it fade away. So anger is an emotion. It arises, it passes away. Not as a theory. You've seen that, you've known that, and you've also accepted it to some degree. That open-heartedness. So here is what anger feels like. It's like this. This is what fear feels like. It's like this. And so that in that moment, the mind has gone from a self-view, like I'm angry about such and such, to this is how anger works in nature. It arises, it does its thing, it feels this way, and then it fades away. So you're not automatically following it, you're not suppressing it, but you're getting to know it and see how it works. And then if that whole cycle is felt and known, that has a major effect upon the attitude. So doing that in the meditation hall over and over a number of times, then in the flow of everyday activity, talking with people, watching the news, and so on and so forth, then as those feelings arise, then there's part of the mind that knows, oh, this is the anger cycle, this is the fear cycle, this is the grief cycle, it's like this. Without suppression and without indulgence, just knowing it as a pattern of the natural world. And again, because of that being known with mindfulness and wisdom, the wisdom faculty is what discerns, oh, this is wholesome and beneficial to follow. This is destructive and harmful to follow. So that the wisdom faculty always recognizes what's wholesome, what's unwholesome, what's beneficial, what's not beneficial. And so that's what I would recommend, particularly the more compelling and forceful the impact of various things in the news or family dynamics, particularly these kind of times of elections. There are also massive elections in India as well. It's like the whole world not the whole world, but a large proportion of the world has gone to vote this year. So that, the emotions that those things stir up to bring the attention inwards and to explore it in that way, it helps to create a much more balanced approach. And then the decisions that you make in terms of your conversations or your actions or whatever you might involve yourself with, or settling arguments in the family, if you've got a blue one, the different siblings and family members, partners, this one's a blue one, this one's a red one, this is a purple one, here's a green one, then you find yourself much more able to find space for each other, and that appreciation of how emotions work, it creates more space in the way that you communicate, and I would say that it enables us to take much more effective action in a much more balanced way. We're living responsively rather than reactively. And seeing that the clock has gone past 9:25, I think it's time to wrap things up. So I'm sure there's many other good questions in the room, but I arrived from Australia yesterday and have to go 120 miles north from here to Abhayagiri this evening. So Does Laurie usually lead the finale?
I think sometimes we do
We do a sharing of blessings? You remind me. You're here more often than I am. Page what?
27.
Do the English version. Page 27.
27.
The verses of sharing and aspiration. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled. Please, yes.
First of all, thank you very much for coming here today and for coming to this gathering and gathering for San Francisco for decades. Really appreciate your teachings and your, as you put this morning, your helping us teach ourselves. There are books for free distribution over along here to the side, so please help yourself to whatever you would like. And we have a couple of ways of, if you're interested in practicing Dhamma, there's a donation box at the front here for the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery. Graciously shared this space with us for many years now. There's also a Dhamma basket in the back for Abhayagiri. And finally, if you could stay and help put away the chairs and the cushions afterwards, that would be greatly appreciated.
Go well. The 10-day retreat begins at Spirit Rock on Friday afternoon, Friday evening. So this is it.